Hello and welcome to a pre-recorded session of the IEEE International Symposium on Digital Privacy and Social Media, being held in San Jose on the 1st of August 2022. My name is Roba Abbas and I'm the Technical Committee Chair of the Socio-Technical Systems Committee within the IEEE Society on the Social Implications of Technology. Today, I'm joined by the Executive Chair of the Symposium, Professor Katina Michael. I would like to begin by acknowledging the main technical sponsor of our event, the IEEE Consumer Technology Society, for making this symposium possible. The IEEE Consumer Technology Society realized that they required a transdisciplinary approach to address global pressing issues related to the design and development of consumer technologies, and have called for diverse stakeholders to come together to respond to digital privacy requirements and matters pertaining to social media in particular. I would also like to thank for their patronage, our gold patron, the IEEE Digital Privacy Initiative, and our silver patron, the Prototype Company, led by Darren Colbreth. And of course, for their ongoing support, the IEEE Society on the Social Implication of Technology, in addition to the IEEE Santa Clara section and the CT-SOC San Francisco Bay Area chapter. Today, we have with us Jumana Abu-Ghazaleh, founder and president of Pivot for Humanity. Pivot for Humanity is the organization working to professionalize the social tech industry, creating a more responsible, ethical, and accountable internet. Jumana has spent over 20 years in marketing and brand communications, developing and implementing strategies for corporations such as America Express, Yahoo, Coca-Cola, and many more. In 2014, Jumana founded and launched Betwixt Us, a digital conversation engine that harnesses technology to create a more authentic connection and communication between individuals on a team. Today, Jumana will present a seminar titled Silicon Mirage, How the Valley Lost Its Promise and One Way It Can Get It Back. And we welcome you, Jumana.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor and a privilege to be speaking with you, Katina, and you, Roba. It's been a long time. I want to start by talking about an old idea, one that I think we're all familiar with from popular culture. The old idea that we're used to from countless movies and television shows was this: if you're ambitious, talented young person on the make, and you were just getting started, there were a few obvious places to go. You went to Hollywood to get famous. You went to Wall Street to get rich. But if you wanted to do those things and change the world, you went to Silicon Valley. That was the promise, right? There's that famous Steve Jobs quote: we attract a different type of person, a person who doesn't want to wait 5 or 10 years to have someone to take a giant risk on him or her, someone who really wants to get in a little over their head and make a dent in the universe. Beautiful, right? And then there's the other Steve Jobs quote that comes to mind. And that's when Steve Jobs was trying to recruit John Scully away from Pepsi. And he said to him, do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or come with me and change the world? Changing the world really was the promise back then. The rhetoric was all over the early Electronic Frontier Foundation and 80s, 90s Silicon Valley literature. Make knowledge universally accessible. Ensure all of us can live up to our potential. Build community where more powerful institutions have only built conformity. Make the world more equitable by toppling all the stodgy old monopolies. Well, there's good news and bad news about that promise. The good news is that promise was correct. Silicon Valley can change the world. There's evidence of that everywhere. The Internet of Things, facial recognition, Bluetooth, drones, social networking, driverless cars, 3D printing, and on and on and on. Tech is everywhere and in everything. The bad news is that promise was correct. Silicon Valley did indeed change the world. But this utopian vision represented was not the end result. This was. Unfortunately, the change tech brought: climate denialism on a burning planet, a workforce forced to urinate in bottles in the world's most advanced economy, no less, genocides, a new platform for demagoguery and the deterioration of democracy, all neatly tied in a bow of surveillance capitalism. All of this looks so different from the change we were supposed to expect. It's a dent in the universe, all right, but not the one those starry-eyed kids in garages were supposed to be excited about. And there's been a sort of dark night of the soul as a result within the industry for a while now, with media and the public and insiders themselves asking, how did we get here? Why? What happened? Where did we go wrong? And when I think of this, there's a story that comes to mind, one that many people are likely familiar with, The Sorcerer's Apprentice. And I think it might be the single best readily available allegory to understand the problem facing the social tech sector as a whole right now. For those of you who haven't watched Fantasia or read Goethe lately, the story goes like this. There's a sorcerer and his apprentice. One day, the apprentice temporarily skips town on a business trip, leaving his inexperienced apprentice to do menial cleaning work in the sorcerer's absence. Initially, the apprentice begrudgingly does his chores until he realizes there's a quicker, more move fast and break things approach to get out of his responsibilities. He could use the magic he barely understands and has no control over and no real respect for to have the cleaning done for him. It takes a second, but pretty soon it quite literally works like a charm. The work is done for him. Automation for the win. The apprentice becomes drunk with power, entering a sort of flow state, probably from seeing all those dollar signs, until something inevitably goes wrong with this powerful magic, and the apprentice doesn't have the experience, knowledge, or wisdom to stop things from getting out of control. He scrambles to fix things, but it's of no use. And just then, when it seems things will go irretrievably wrong, the sorcerer thankfully arrives early and reasserts control over the magic that only he is qualified to properly wield. The apprentice sheepishly admits wrongdoing and is upbraided for it. The lesson is straightforward enough. Only those who have mastered powerful forces should be permitted to unleash them upon the world. The surface level resonance of the fable for this particular age, as they intersect with the colossal failures and externalities imposed by Silicon Valley, are obvious. Much of technology, much too much of technology, has been harnessed to achieve short-term quarterly ends without any safeguards in place to ensure its safe usage. To me, it's pretty obvious who the apprentices are, who have mistaken themselves for the sorcerer. That's venture capital. Venture capital claimed they would fund the lofty dreams of the creators, but instead we got what we have now, the detritus of those dreams. Because venture capital and management incentivized to act like venture capital are not interested in making a dent in the universe. They're interested in one thing only, the promise of quick money through inflated company valuations. And as a result, too often, the sorcerers, those who have real mastery and understanding of the magical tools and how to use them, that's the tech workers themselves, have been forced to bow before VC and the manager class. So who are these tech workers? Lately, with the wave of unionization efforts overtaking Amazon and other major tech firms, that's become a surprisingly urgent question. We're not just talking about coders and hoodies anymore. We're talking about everyone whose labor is essential to making Silicon Valley hum. That's everyone from the driver and the warehouse employee to the data analyst and the project manager. Chris Smalls, the worker who successfully unionized Amazon, framed it as such, I quote, "So we, as workers, the working class, we got to realize our values. If we don't go to work, these CEOs don't make their money. So if workers can realize that, then no matter where you work in this country or what you're doing, you'll realize that you form something that can collectively bargain." So there's pressure on the apprentices, the VC, from the bottom up, but that's not the only place there's pressure being applied. It's happening at the top as well. There's been a flurry of business press stories recently about Silicon Valley realizing they're in a more precarious place economically than they had previously assumed. And for good reason. As one CNN article states, quote, "For years, startups generally followed the same playbook, which was grow as fast as possible at whatever the burn rate. That's what their investors wanted to see. Capital was cheap, so losses didn't matter. But that's changed. Once again, profits matter," end quote. The VC apprentices are no longer capable of or in control of that much magic anymore, are they? These are mutually reinforcing tendencies. the more squeezed management gets, the more obvious it is that the reign of apprentice venture capitalists drumming up stratospheric VC valuations can't last forever. And the more disenchanted tech workers become, the more likely they are to act in cross-role solidarity because they have less to lose by speaking up. But it's not just tech workers that increasingly view their own industry dimly. Increasingly, it's the public. In some ways, it's taken 20 years to get here. One could argue that the mystique of Silicon Valley really came to life with the famous 1984 Apple ad that promised power to the people, and unceremoniously lost its sheen when Elon Musk attacked a child rescuer on Twitter, making it abundantly clear how big tech really views the people. There was a long, long period of time where the public became used to the idea of Silicon Valley as an economic sector in its own right, familiar with its names, brands, personalities. We forget that there was a time before, when there was only one Amazon, the vast biome that spans 8 countries, none of which are the United States. It took another 10 years for the major companies to all be set in most Americans' minds, and then another 10 or so to fall out of love with them. I'm not here to say it's a bad time. This is, despite all appearances to the contrary, a time for building. The apprentices are outed as incompetent, and the sorcerers are returning, hopefully before it's too late, just like in the story I told you earlier. It's a time to ask, what world do we build if the fable ends right and the sorcerers regain control? What dent in the universe do we want to make on purpose this time? Each of the people on the screen, along with many others, are standing up to say, loud and clear, technology has consequences, and we should anticipate them before we lose all control. They're saying that technology needs a new North Star to replace venture capital's obsession with scale and growth, and demanding a North Star that reflects their values. A North Star that doesn't dismiss the harm the industry causes to the most marginalized as simply an unintended consequence. It's time for tech workers and technologists to imagine another world, a world in which they have the right and the power to work in accordance with their values, to reclaim their craft from the private sector apprentices demanding entertaining stories of new conveniences and vast personal riches, instead of a world that works humanely, inclusively, safely, thoughtfully. In other words, a world that works in the public interest. I think about the quote you see on the screen a lot from Cathy O'Neill, the mathematician, data scientist, and author. She says, instead of asking the question, who will benefit from the system I'm implementing with the data, I started to ask the question, what will happen to the most vulnerable? Or who is going to lose under this system? How will this affect the worst off person? Which is a very different question from, how does this improve certain people's lives? It's a standard thing you hear from startup people, that their product is somehow improving the world, and that if you follow the reasoning, you will get somewhere. And I'll tell you where you get. You'll get to the description of what happens to the winners under the system that they're building. That's what we do when we work in Silicon Valley tech startups. We think about who's going to benefit from this. That's almost the only thing we think about. So it's time. It's time for technologists to think about something else, to empower themselves and protect themselves and the people they're working for from the demands of those whose only agenda can be summarized in one word: more. It's time for the sorcerers to return and reclaim their craft. Many are already out there, having realized they do have power, even if they're not the ones with the money. And they're starting to make a real, beautiful, purposeful dent in the universe. I hope you join them. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Jumana, for your powerful presentation. As always, might I add, I'm sure Katina would agree with me, such a thought-provoking presentation. And I will hand over to Katina, first of all, for some reflections and questions before asking a few of my own.
That was so stimulating, wasn't it, Roba? I never should be surprised when I hear Jumana speak, but you have this uncanny ability, Jumana, to hone in and zoom in to that part of the problem that needs to be identified in order to propose a solution and a way forward. So thank you so much for the time taken in that presentation, perhaps a short presentation, but one that took weeks to prepare. We talked about dreams right at the beginning of the presentation. And I'm wondering where these dreams come from and how we may reimagine where we're going. But how would we solicit from a community or society at large their dreams? And how does that process work to reimagine?
That's a great question. I think that the imagination, including moral imagination, is there in us all if we are able to, the challenge is to be able to share it with the world. And the narrative has been co-opted, and the people's dreams have been channeled towards more, faster, more cheaper, more money all the time. The dreams that people have take second, third, and fourth place when that happens. They sort of slowly lose touch with it, and then it gets replaced by this other ambition. But you see it all around you all the time. People go to Silicon Valley genuinely because they have parents who have struggled, or they themselves have experienced something, or they've witnessed something in the world. And you see people that's going straight from college into work, but also people leaving tech companies like Google to go on work to work on challenges like the climate and things like that. The dreams are in us. I think we just need to be able to see that we can do something about them, that we can move them forward, that they can become real. And that's when people like Chris Smalls are incredibly not just heroic, but meaningful and important to the cultural zeitgeist, because they show us that a dream from a single person really can have a massive impact on society as a whole. And that's what we need to see more of, and I think that's what we're starting to see more of, that dreams can become real and they can be your own dreams, not somebody else's.
My follow-on question was actually, what is the relationship between dreams and culture? And you alluded to that. Can you talk to us more about the importance of culture?
Of course. I mean, I don't know how you disentangle them. I don't know how you take dreams out of the culture, or culture out of the dreams. I mean, it is how we live and work and love and learn. And that's all culture. That's all around us. So when you're talking about dreams of changing the world, you're talking about impacting people. You're talking about influencing, sociocultural systems. You're talking about changing how people learn, how education is evolving or developing. I think the rift happens when dreams are actually artificially severed from culture by forces like venture capital that say the only thing that matters is a high valuation. And so do whatever you can to attain a high valuation and make more money, because then that separates the earliest dream you had from the practicality you're facing. Those aren't the same things. That's not how you live your dream. You don't live your dream by trying to make as much money as possible. You live your dream by going ahead and investigating how best to bring it to life. This idea that you had that something can be done to make the world a better place.
I'm reminded here about how technology can sometimes flatten culture, trying to introduce a monoculture. I have heard experts talk about, wouldn't it be great if every person in the world could speak English and then we could all communicate? And motivations towards making that possible, actually considering ways to go about that. And sometimes I think from what I see in your presentation, when you talk about humane tech, is that there's a normalization process that happens when big tech is diffused to the globe. And that is, rather than enriching culture, it's a flattening of culture. It's towards this way or no way, this way or the highway. You do it my way. And because, these systems are designed in this way to ask you certain questions, you need to go this way. Talk to us about what the normalization of all of these digital technologies have done to culture.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right, and that the direction is towards monoculture, and it in fact is an imposition of a uniform culture, which is ironic, right? Because the whole dream of Silicon Valley, or an important part of it, was this idea that of communities versus conformity, of making room for everyone, no matter who they are, where they come from, what they want. And instead, what's happening is a quite systematic imposition on the world from, privileged male white environment of a set of a certain culture, because Silicon Valley likes to do things a certain way, the rest of the world must do it too. Focusing Silicon Valley's efforts on food delivery apps when there's a food crisis in the world is imposing in a certain way a cultural framework on a world that where it doesn't fit, where it doesn't apply, and that happens in so many ways. There are I'm sure you've heard it before, people talking about how so many things coming out of Silicon Valley are things that young men, used to have their mothers do for them. They want to eat. They don't know how to do it themselves. They want to do their laundry. They want to get driven somewhere. And that lens, that view of the world as is very limited. That's all you see. They have blinders on because that's the world that they see, and then they assume that that's how everybody else lives, and it really robs the rest of the world from not just its magic, but its ability to contribute to global culture. And technology is in so many ways a way of exporting culture. It's it takes culture and actually amplifies it, and most of that culture is coming from Silicon Valley.
It's interesting because some people I have spoken to in that region, not far from Arizona, actually don't know how to cook, don't know how to drive. Mm-hmm. And this doesn't surprise me, or sometimes it does actually, because one of the first things I wanted to do is get a license when I turned 16.
The problems. Sorry, go ahead.
No. What do you think? Yes.
I mean, the problems that we are solving are problems of the privileged few. We're not solving real problems on a global scale, like climate change, like hunger, like disease. Mm-hmm. We are pouring venture capital money by the billions into things at the end of the day that are only useful to the extent that they make some people rich. They don't make the world a better place. They don't help people heal. They don't help build community. They don't create peace or foster camaraderie. They don't help people understand each other better. They end up actually dividing people more. And that's what happens when you think you have all the answers, when you think that that the world that you live in is the one that's right, and the only thing left to do is expand it, is grow it, is export it, and impose it on the culture.
You spoke about these wonderful role models. I want to hear a little bit more about them, because I believe you're one of those people.
Thank you.
To me and Roba, you're one of those role models. And when you look at role models, the truth is, they don't have access to the PR and branding and massive big tech corporate kind of footprint, nor those megaphones that can drown out. And we had Nicole Stevenson talk about the giants, and how the vantage points from everyday consumers was looking up at the giants, you know, and doing what you were told, because, or should look down that way. The giant says, I must do this, I must buy this, I must be locked in, I must actually buy that new or download that new app, and I must lock in, and I must look at their advertisements, and I must. She was talking about this vantage points and this disparity. Tell us about the role models, many of whom I would say are not ultra rich people. They're everyday people that have decided that they're going to live that lifestyle of trying to raise awareness. But tell us about some of the characters, in your eyes, what's unique about them?
Well, let me start by saying that, Nicole is brilliant and astute as always, and that metaphor really does apply. There is a power dynamic, and it is very powerful. It's a very powerful story we tell ourselves, that and that they tell us over and over, that they have the answers and we don't, and therefore we should just listen. What the role models are teaching us is that actually going back to the early days, the before Amazon, when there was the Amazon, when the only Amazon people knew was the Amazon, before Silicon Valley became a myth and a reality that's larger than life. The dreams were real. The dreams existed. They were regular people, intelligent or passionate or both, but they were human beings who wanted to do something meaningful, to contribute to their societies, their communities in a meaningful way. And the role models that I see today are sort of reclaiming that position and saying, I think we forgot that we were the ones who created the valley. I think we forgot, because we're working for these tech giants and looking up at them, we forgot that we have values, and that our values matter, and that we could do something about them. And each of those people in their own way is there's so many ways in which I think that Nicole's metaphor is great, because it flips the narrative, right? To me, they are the giants. They are the giants because they have courage, and they have values, and they live by those values, and they are willing to take risks. I mean, what bigger risk is there? We talk about, like Steve Jobs saying, we attract the kinds of people that want to take risks and don't want to wait for somebody to take risks on them. What kind of dreamer and what kind of courage does it take to take on the big giants? I mean, that's power. That's the origin of Silicon Valley. That's the real Silicon Valley, is people who are like saying, this is not right and this is not okay, and I can't just sit back and watch it.
Jumana, what you described reminds me of slavery once upon a time, and how we all said no to slavery, but what has been reintroduced from the days of the fields and people working long hours, tending to sheep and tending to other people's needs in agricultural times, thousands of years ago, or even hundreds of years ago, has now been flipped onto a service industry, a technology-based industry, where we call it, instead of slavery, modern indentured servitude, which is a special issue that Professor Jeremy Pitt of Imperial College London raised over the last 18 months in particular. And is it that we are all at the point where we can now see it, we can give it a label, it's visible now. That which was once hidden is now visible. And what does that mean for change?
I think that's absolutely right, which is why I think this is a time for building. I think that there's a lot of recalibrating, and you know, it's taken time, but these things do take time. It's taken time for us to not fall out of love, but realize that we were blinded, that we weren't getting what we were promised. It's also taken us some time to realize we actually can do something about it. The pandemic has helped people, young people, really think hard about the choices they want to make and the lives they want to live and the sacrifices they want to make. There's been so much turmoil in the world that it has given a lot of people pause and an opportunity to take a step back and reconsider their role in the world. I think we've also, there's an entire generation or two that actually grew into technology, that suddenly realizing they were trapped in a web and that it doesn't have to be that way. And there is this confluence of factors coming together that is getting people to say, what kind of world do we want? And importantly, what kind of legacy do we want to leave? And I think that it's clear, you can see, there is a certain type of Silicon Valley stereotype that makes it clear that the legacy they want to have is that they amassed tons and tons of money. And that's a choice. But now people aren't confusing that with putting a dent in the universe anymore. And that makes a real difference, I think.
I agree. Studying innovation systems, Silicon Valley being one of the sort of regional innovation hubs, a lot of other regions have thought about replicating that model and almost repeating the same mistakes over and over again. It's also considered a very much, that's why it's called Silicon Valley, a technical orientation within that region. And Arizona, for example, is about to go into the development of its own Silicon Valley style area. And I just hope they're listening to the kinds of comments you're making about the new Belmont project that Bill Gates is heading up in Arizona, because I think there's a brilliant opportunity there not to make the same mistakes, to look at the innovation system, take the good things out of it and say, look, this is what works when companies co-located. This is what didn't work. But with that, I just wanted to pass back to Roba. I think I've hogged too much of the time today.
Thank you so much, Katina and Jumana. That was a very fascinating discussion. I think in terms of some questions that I'll ask, I wanted to take all of those concepts that you spoke about, Jumana, and that you reflected on with Katina, and talk about how we might operationalize all of these ideas. So first of all, I'll probably return to the idea of dreaming, which is where you started off the discussion and the reflection with Katina. So how do we solicit dreams of members of the public was something that you spoke about, ideas about culture and moral imagination. And I want to tie that to another statement you just made a moment ago and in your presentation, which I think was quite optimistic. And I really like that. I really like the idea of latching on to that optimistic view of this being a time for building. My question for you is, how do we tie this process of soliciting dreams to the actual process of building? So you ask, what world do we want to build, or what world do we build for ourselves? How do we get from that dream or those dreams to the actual process of building? And do you see those role models that you mentioned earlier as having a potential part to play there?
Yes, thank you. That's quite a question. Yes, so I think the first thing we have to do is, we've talked about this in the past, as have a lot of your, esteemed panelists, but how do you build in the public interest? How do you create technology in the public interest? And I think that's a shift in mindset that will then require scaffolding, right? So right now we play on like, how do we build for growth? How do we build to, and and quite often we actually use the language of disease. When things go viral, we are happy. That should indicate something, should tell us something. So how do we instead focus on growth and development in a healthy way rather than virality and speed and scale? And so that's the big question, is what is the North Star? I know I keep talking about needing a new North Star, but we do for everything, right? You want to know where you're going. Otherwise, you're just kind of wandering aimlessly. You can't talk about making a dent in the universe just by throwing spaghetti on the wall. You have to kind of dream something up. You have to say, this is the vision that I have. And you do that by defining what the role of technology is. And I think that's a prerequisite, is to say, what is technology for? In the same way that like the other professions in the world exist, they have a mission, they have a vision, they have a role, they have a responsibility in society that people can hold them to account. So why does Silicon Valley exist? What is its role in the world? What does it want to do? And if it's to say, well, we want to solve gnarly problems. Okay, then let's help define what gnarly problems are. We want to make the world a better place. Well, let's talk about what that means. Whatever those things are. But there isn't one unifying role for social technology. There isn't a purpose. It's not purpose driven. And until it is, it's just going to be focused on it's going to default to the existing narrative, which is you can get rich. And the other part, and famous. And then the other part, the dream part, goes away, right? If the dream of making a real difference in the world goes away. So I think the first thing to do is to say that this is now no longer just a loose network of people experimenting. This is now a profession, and a profession professes its purpose, and it outlines an approach, a system of beliefs and values that the social technology community would all have to adapt and adopt. And so you go from, people just kind of, trying things and seeing what works, to people working with purpose towards specific ends within the bounds and limitations and value sets that are established by the community for the community.
Some excellent suggestions there, Jumana. I do want to pick up on the North Star idea in a moment, but before I do so, I find it really interesting how you talk about the idea of professionalization, and I think that's really necessary to transition from that move fast and break things mentality and that short-term gains approach to something that's more purposeful, to something that's more in the public interest. You did mention professionalization, or at least declaring that this is a profession and being held accountable as a result. What do we need to do first in that regard from a practical perspective? Is it about education? Is it about higher education? Does industry play more of a role? And I'll return to sort of a part that I mentioned in the earlier question of what do the role models do in this instance? What can they do to encourage this shift? So just practically speaking, where do we start here?
I mean, profession is a complex sounding word for a really simple idea. And that's a group of people coming together to say, here's what we want our work to do. It started with a few men, it's always men, right? But it started with a few men in medicine, same with engineering. And the idea of a profession is like when people come together and say, wow, we can actually wield significant power on society. We have tremendous influence in culture. There's a responsibility that comes with that. Some people want to acknowledge that. and some people don't care. And the public needs to have the ability to know the difference. And so professions are formed when a group of people that can start small get together and say, these are the values that we will live by. And I'm not talking about company value statements. I'm not talking about, things that can, that are fungible and that come and go and are meant to, serve as marketing devices. I'm talking about actually the soul of the thing. If Silicon Valley had a soul, what would it be? And how would you articulate that? And so, the profession, saying Silicon Valley or social technology is a profession is as simple as saying it has a purpose. And that purpose is defined by the people who are in it, who create it. And the next step is, it's interesting because when you say things like professionalization, a lot of people tune out because it says, oh, I don't want to get another degree. And part of the ethos of Silicon Valley is, I don't need to, I can have not even graduate college and become, and change the world. And all of that is true. What we were learning though, is there's a difference. I'm not talking about a degree or learning about a certain level of skill. I'm talking about a requirement that people be exposed to and understand the relationship between the power that they wield and the consequences that it has on the world. And so having people understand ethics, I don't think is a crazy requirement. I don't think it's unfair. And if people say no, they don't want to do it, well, that should tell us something. So there's the connection I would make, is a profession is something that people say, here's our purpose. And we take an oath to say that that's our purpose. And therefore, everybody, including the community itself can hold you accountable. And that's when it becomes real, is when other people can say, that's wrong. Right now, there are no rules. There's no way to say this is right or wrong. We have companies slinging mud at each other, saying, well, their privacy is terrible and they fool people and they use your information. Whatever it is, it's a mudslinging fest. It's not really an accountability process or framework. And that's what a profession helps to do, is to take a set of values and actually operationalize them once you've unified the community around a set of values.
What a fabulous response, Jumana. And I think we're almost out of time. I do have other questions, but I might just dilute them down into the one question that we've been asking everyone. So with the backdrop of technology needing that new North Star that you spoke about, one in which values are privileged, we've asked everyone as part of this series to respond to this question. If you had one message for Silicon Valley, what would that be, Jumana?
Dream again. Go back to dreaming and believe in the dream. Don't get distracted by the shiny objects. Don't believe the stories of that are being imposed on you by the giants that Nicole was mentioning. Dream your own dreams and go make them real, because there is room for that. Even if you don't feel like you have any power, dream.
And what a powerful way to end that, Jumana. Thank you so very much. Thank you so much also to everyone who's been viewing this video for your attention. And if you like what you've heard, please head over to the registration link on your screen and register for the IEEE International Symposium on Digital Privacy and Social Media. And also, if you would like to find out more, please feel free to visit the web pages on your screen. So we've got the symposium website. We also have information there about the in-person and other pre-records, the in-person program and other pre-records there on that site. Please also feel free to visit the sites of the IEEE Consumer Technology Society, the IEEE Digital Privacy Initiatives, the IEEE Society on the Social Implications of Technology, and the IEEE Future Directions Committee websites. Once again, a very big thank you to our speaker, Jumana Abu-Ghazaleh, and I'd also like to thank my co-host and executive chair of this symposium, Professor Katina Michael. Thank you.
Thank you.